Hey, it's the Chief Bonding with board games and RPGs, and I wanted to do a HAMTAG solo, baby. HAMTAG! So that means it's going to be a top 5 list under the HAMTAG banner, but it's just me. And yes, if I can get Greg and Judd back in for another episode, we will do it. I just don't know when that'll be. But here's what I wanted to do. Queen of the Skies, B-17, Queen of the Skies, is still my favorite game. I am extremely fortunate that it was the first serious hobby board game I ever purchased. I had seen a store at Southwest Plaza in Denver, Colorado. I lived up in Evergreen, Colorado, up in the mountains. And I wandered in because I was reading a lot of World War II history, and I thought, at first I even thought it was a bookstore. And then I thought, what, these are games? And I found this, and I looked at it a couple times, and then like the third time I was down at Southwest Plaza, I think I bought it for 15 bucks. So I picked it up. But I have a top 5 list of why this game is still special to me, and why it still gets a lot of buzz in the board game world. 1983 is when I purchased this. 40 years and it's still being purchased, still being played. There's a new version of this that's out there that, well, that's a whole nother video. But this will be on what are the top 5 things of B-17 Queen of the Skies that have kept it relevant. And number 5, which this sounds like a no-brainer, but it's solo play. And what I like to say with this is when you play B-17 Queen of the Skies, you're not just playing with yourself. Okay? It's got a deeper solo immersion that a lot of solitaire games simply don't have. In my opinion, a lot of solitaire games are just you kind of moving this and okay, you're doing that or whatever. This is about you. You're almost like the ghost on the plane. You're not the plane, but you feel this connection to the plane. I could understand how it would be possible for a pilot or a crew to become attached to an inanimate object. This is the device that's bringing you home. It has its own little quirks and little things to it. Now, I know they didn't always get to fly their particular plane. When I actually learned that, I was a little bit devastated. I was a little older and I was reading and I was like, what? They don't just always fly their one particular plane? Well, if it's not ready and another one is, up you go. So the solo play immersion here is top notch. And it's beyond caring about the plane as a thing, kind of like how the Enterprise is famous and you can feel the Enterprise in Star Trek. Your plane and the name of that plane becomes special, but so does the crew. You have these 10 positions, and it's funny because when I was in, well, I was 13, so I was quickly like losing planes, losing crew, and I'm thinking, where do I come up with more names? And I thought, I grabbed like a yearbook, a middle school yearbook, I think, off the shelf, and just was like randomly throwing names back in my crew just to replace. And I will always remember this. There was a kid who shall go nameless, who I did not like that much. He was mean and not fun. And he ended up on my plane, and I remember writing him in, and I was thinking, so-and-so. And then he was heroic. He did these fabulous things and could shoot BF-109s out of the sky like nobody's business, putting out fires, helping crew. And this sounds dumb, but when I would see him later on in school, I was kind of like, well, I got to give him a little credit. What? Even I knew it was weird, and I thought, I don't know, I feel like I've spent some time with him, and maybe he's not such a bad guy. Which is true, he wasn't really such a bad guy. Had nothing to do with the game, but it was funny that playing the fictional version of him, which he never knew, I was always a little worried like a buddy would come over and see and go, hey, what's my name doing on this game? And I'd go, don't worry about it, nothing to see here, nothing to see here. But that's number 5. Number 5 is the solo play, baby. This is a different, deeper kind of solo play. And the last story of number 5 kind of is the segue into my number 4 of why the B-17 Queen of the Skies holds on, and that is the personalization. It's the ability to name that plane. You can put as little or as much effort into that as you want. As you play, you tend to put less because the planes just don't last. It's the putting the crew on there. I was playing hundreds and hundreds of games, which is why the student ended up getting onto my list or onto my plane. But it's that personalization. Most people I know, that first game, they throw in their buddies, maybe their family members, spouses have ended up on crews, and you end up with this plane crew and you're not sure what you're doing. And then they start to come to life on the plane, or the plane starts to pick up a certain kind of character. And that personalization level on top of the Solitaire framework, it's not just a game and here's a name of a commando and I'm going to move Commando Jim over here. It's that person, that name, and even made-up names, suddenly they start to kind of crystallize, at least for me, and I know for some folks I've talked to, as if they're real people. And that personalization is what made the first real-life impression on me in terms of how cruel and harsh and random and dangerous death and war can be. And that level of personalization is what helps make it so visceral, so real. As if you know these individuals, because oftentimes you did, or at least the persona of the engineer you knew. And it catapulted the game into this next level, all in here, not really on here. It could have been preset names. There was a game that was Solitaire. Think of B-17, but it wasn't a plane. It was some other total thing. And the crew names, they were just names that were slotted in. Here's your replacement person, Phillips. I don't know who that is. And it shouldn't matter, but I was like, okay, whatever. I had no connection to them. Here, I even made up a whole squadron. So I didn't have a lot of connections because I had like 120 planes, the associated crew, hello, 1,200, a whole notebook full of names. But even in that, certain planes started to make themselves known. Certain crew members on planes, wow. I mean, just rose and stood out. Crazy. Nuts. Number 3, abstracted realism. Abstracted realism. So one thing I've talked to folks about that didn't get into B-17 Queen of the Skies is that they're like, it's like a comic book. Not all the stuff that happens to one plane, although possible, it didn't really, that's not how missions went. You didn't have all this stuff. It's a little bit comic booky. But what made it ring true for me was that as you played through the experience, there was the smidgen of this. There are some plane stories we know about where these things happened. But it's that abstracted reality that over the 8th Air Force or the 15th or whichever bomb group you wanted to talk about, these things happened. And you experience them much more frequently in general, but it wasn't as if these things didn't happen. So it somehow felt more real, even though I knew it was somewhat abstracted. The play itself, of course, is abstracted. This game doesn't get into, there's a mechanical fail chart, but it doesn't dive into, oh, the Norden bomb site wouldn't calibrate or whatever. You're not going to get into that level of detail. Some folks, that was a knock to them. They wanted to, hey, the right number 4 engine isn't running right. It's rough. How could I trim it out? Or well, I didn't want any of that. What this zoomed in on was kind of all the combats over all of the war packed into a plane. And the other thing that made this work really well is the B-17 bombers or the B-24s, they flew in the box formations. These weren't fighters that are dipping in and pulling, you know, and running all over the place. Your main goal, if you were doing it right, was to hold formation, make it tight, and support your other planes in your section with your machine guns in your plane. A tight boxed formation, low, middle, high, lead, middle, tail. And then to the target and back. Because of that, the world inside the plane was its own revolving, interesting story. You're kind of on rails, zone to zone to zone. And I'll come back to that a little bit further down my list. Number 2, visceral actions of dread. Visceral actions of dread. So, some folks will say all you're doing is playing a spreadsheet. You have your charts, you roll dice, it tells you to go to there, maybe you roll again, and then maybe you roll again, and how many hits, this many, where, high, middle, low, what section, and you're just rolling on the charts, and there's not too much for you to do. Technically true. It's not like, again, you're making tons and tons of decisions. Now, there could be certain things. There's a fire, which gun, where you're going to have a crewman go put that fire out or attempt to, and you're leaving a gun open. So there are decisions. But the visceral actions of dread are the importance of that die roll to hopefully hit that plane or to maybe throw a long spray burst at it and get it to break off because, you know, if it puts a bunch of hits on you or walks them, even worse, you know, right down your fuselage or right down your wings. Ugh. And then there's two areas. Once I was over the target zone and dropped the bomb load, a big weight lifts off of you because your bomb bay could get hit, the bombs could get hit in the bomb bay, and boom, your plane's gone and everyone in it. So when those bombs were away, an amazing feeling of we've made it to the target, we've dropped the explosives in the bay, and now we just got to fight our way home. You felt a certain amount of relief. You still knew, don't let the fuel tanks catch on fire. And you could do nothing about it, just like the crews flying could do nothing about it if the fuel tanks caught on fire. But it was that visceral dread, or a crew member's hit, and you're attached to the crew member and you're rolling, and oh, the 6 came up, and then you can kind of visualize, or whoa, a light wound, good, good. Whoa, another light wound. Oh, a third light wound, are you kidding me? But he's still dodging the bullet. My goodness. And heroism starts to make itself known on the plane. And you're like, what? What? Wow. But the dread associated with a roll to a plane and a crew that have come to life in your head. Love it. Hard to do. And done. Number 1 on why B-17 Queen of the Skies is still such an awesome game. It is a long way home. This board has one counter on it, and it is your squadron or your flight wing moving out concentric circle by concentric circle. I'll throw up a picture on the side here so you can see it better as you move toward the target. The delineating line when you are beyond your little friends, your fighter escort, and you feel like you're leaving it behind. When I was running the squadron I was using the general with the expanded map and all the additional targets, and when you drew a tough target, a very distant target, it was like, ah. And then when you were flying it, I was flying, so if it was a 50 plane mission, I flew that mission 50 times with 50 different planes and 50 different crews. But as you marched out and then had to crawl and scrap and fight your way back, this chart made it feel like you were crossing time and space. The new game, it looks better. It's got a lot of extra detail in it, but they did just a little box chart where you were moving zones and you're moving just, and I was like, no, no, no. I need to see it. I don't want to see a bar of squares that are saying zone 1, 2, 3, 4, 15. It doesn't feel like I'm in space and time. This, I would look at it and just think, man, if I can just get back to fighter cover, get me back to fighter cover. And if I can get to fighter cover, I think I'll make it. And then you would get to fighter cover and just get hammered. And you'd be like, what the heck? Where are your little friends at? Come on. Plane that was just shot all to hell. You know, and another hit, your rudder's gone. Another hit in your wing root might literally break off. And you're limping in. And then when you finally, your successive into friendly fighter cover over the channel, into base, you can see the flares being popped. You got wounded on board. You got to get priority to land, and you come in and you're like, I remember sitting there after playing and just thinking, literally kind of exhausted. That's crazy. That's crazy. The brain was tired. The danger was felt. Not really, but you know, you felt there was a risk. Same deal with role-playing. If you know your character can't be killed, there's got to be some risk there. You don't want them all just getting toasted real quick, but if there's not some risk, and boy, is there risk in here. So the map, The Long Way Home, it's just this little piece of paper, but it was so key to the game and the experience and the immersion. Number one, The Long Way Home. Chief, bonding with board games, HAMTAG, solo, baby. I don't know how many of these will do. I prefer the crowd. I prefer the group. I like the flank being present. See you guys. Bye.